How's it going, all y'all awesome fish folk? To those of you that are new to my channel, my name is Austin, and this is Fintastic Freaks. Something I thought of is that people in times past have asked me, like, stocking ideas for certain tanks, or in terms more specifically of like, hey, like, I have a 20-gallon tank. What species of puffer could I fit in here? And while I know some people would love to get a Fahaka, or even the granddaddy of them all, the Mabu puffer, let's face it, not all of us can afford a huge 100-plus gallon tank. So what are some puffers you could fit in a smaller tank? Well, in today's video, guys, I want to give you 8 great suggestions for a 40-gallon tank or smaller. A little rule of thumb here, when I talk about 40 gallons, I more along the lines mean like a 40-gallon breeder. But without further ado, guys, let's get at today's video and see 8 suggestions for an aquarium 40 gallons or smaller. So the first of the 8 great puffers we'll talk about is the Amazon puffer. So Amazon puffers, which are also very commonly known as South American puffers because, well, they're native to parts of South America, are a puffer out there that if you don't like to just dedicate a tank to one singular fish, well then Amazon puffers could be a great fit for you because this puffer not only can live with multiple of its kind, it prefers to live in little groups of its kind, or more appropriately, shoals of its kind. With that in mind, Amazon puffers in, say, like, for example, a 40-gallon breeder, you could probably fit up to 3 to possibly 5. I wouldn't do over 5 myself personally in a 40-gallon breeder, especially if you put in like some plants, some wood, some rocks, just things to break up the line of sight and create extra little territories in that tank. Then 3 to 5 Amazon puffers should work perfectly fine inside a 40-gallon breeder. The only note that I guess really somewhat makes them a little different than some other puffers perhaps is that these guys can tolerate some higher water temperatures. In fact, I've heard some people keeping them in water as warm as 84 degrees, sometimes even up to 86. I personally don't keep them up that high. I keep them somewhere between 78 and 80 degrees typically. That usually has worked pretty well, especially since I like to do plants in there. Anything above that, and it might be more difficult to keep the plants from melting away. And I guess it's also worth noting that while I personally don't recommend it, Amazon puffers have also been successfully kept in community tanks with other fish outside of just another puffer species. Again, this is not something I totally recommend, as if a puffer gets moody, they have those very powerful teeth that can do devastating damage to about any fish out there. So if you are absolutely set on trying this, an Amazon puffer is probably one of the 2 main species that I'd say have the best probability of getting away with it, but make sure you still pick your fish strategically. Make sure you get some fish that are faster swimming than your puffers. No slow moving fish, or it's probably not going to end very well for any slow swimmers. Number 2 on the list is a dragon puffer. So a dragon puffer, which is also sometimes referred to as a humpback puffer, is an Asian puffer that usually just likes to chill towards the bottom of a tank. There have been some people that have successfully kept 2 dragon puffers with each other before, although in a 40-gallon breeder or so, I would probably recommend that it's better to just keep one by itself. This is also a puffer that can grow a little bit bigger. This one can max out somewhere between 6 to 8 inches before its growth spurt is all said and done. And personally, with a dragon puffer, I would recommend nothing smaller than a 40 breeder. In fact, a 40 breeder might be towards the smaller side. You can maybe get away with like a 29 or something as it's in its juvenile stage, but the closer it gets to the adult stage, something 40 gallons breeder or up is probably going to become more of a need than a luxury for this puffer. The main challenge though really with a dragon puffer, like some other ambush puffers sometimes, and while there are exceptions across the board, ambush puffers can prove a little more trickier to feed, as sometimes you may have no choice but to start with like live feedings with things like ghost shrimp, or maybe some feeder crays, or self-cloning crays, or stuff like that. After a while though, at least with any ambush puffer that I've had in the past, I've eventually gotten them to eat other things like frozen krill or even sometimes frozen silver sides, but sometimes they just don't give in and just stay strictly live fed. So if you don't like feeding live creatures to a puffer, then this may not be one for you. On the other hand, if you don't mind feeding live things such as fish, shrimp, crayfish, snails, etc., then a dragon puffer could be right up your alley. That, and as you can see on the markings, it is a beautiful, beautiful fish. While they do like to hide sometimes, that's kind of another downside about them, but again, if you don't mind that, and when you do see them though, they are truly something to just admire. Number 3 on the list, red-eye puffers. So the red-eye pufferfish, which are also somewhat commonly known as Malabar puffers as well, is a smaller pufferfish where you don't even need a 40-gallon breeder. I have 4 myself inside a 20-gallon long tank here. So with that said, one of the positives about the red-eye puffers is, yeah, they don't get very big. These guys usually stop growing after they hit about 2-3 inches at most. So again, 4 of them. 4 is about the max I would put inside a 20-gallon long. So to those of you that maybe don't have room for the bigger tanks, this could be an awesome little puffer for you. Another plus I would say of these kinds of puffers is that this is another species of puffer where it's easy to distinguish the males from the females. The big one here with the more white creamier bellies and like the stripes, and they sometimes have a stripe down the middle of their belly as well, are the males, whereas the one here towards the front of the glass with more markings about her, including the markings on her belly, yeah, that's a female. While it's very difficult to do, if you're interested at any point in trying to maybe even breed puffers, at least here you can get the first step of making sure you have some males and females in the same tank. However, the main downside I would probably attribute to these puffers is that they can prove rather tricky to find. This is definitely a puffer that if you want it, get like a 20-gallon long or whatever size tank you want to put them in, set up so that way when you see them, you're ready to go. But to those of you out there that don't have room for the big tanks and can only hold things like 10 and 20-gallon tanks, these red-eye puffers could be just what you're looking for. Number 4 on the list is the spotted Congo Puffer. So right off the bat, I'm just gonna say out of all the puffers on this list, this one is probably the most expensive and maybe even arguably the hardest to find. If you're not afraid to open up your pocketbook a little bit to get a few of these, or at least just a pair of these or so, then this could be an awesome puffer that'll definitely capture anybody's attention inside any 40-gallon breeder. If you want to get more than 2 or at the maximum, if you definitely want to get more than 3 of these, or can get more than 3 of these, you're probably better off going above 40 gallons and probably bumping up to something like a 75-gallon tank. However, if you're alright with just getting a pair, then I would say a pair would probably do just fine inside a 40-gallon breeder. If you really go hard on the aquascape with like rocks, plants, woods and such to have multiple areas that break up the line of sight, then you can maybe get away with 3. This is another puffer where some people have had success also keeping these in community aquariums with other fish outside of the puffer species. Once again, I don't really recommend ever doing community tanks with puffers as centerpiece fish, just because it only takes the puffer to get irritated, annoyed, whatever you want to call it, one time and blow a devastating bite on any fish. However, this is one of the 2 main species where people have had the most likelihood of having success. This puffer grows give or take around the 4 inches mark there, and if you can get away with it, they're definitely a very pretty fish that usually is pretty docile, at least as far as puffers go anyway. But the main thing here is, again, just not easy to find, and therefore the price tag kind of shows it. Next up at number 5, we have Pea Puffers. So those of you that have been around on the channel for a while, y'all already know the drill. Before there was any other puffer down here in the fish room, the whole palooza began with Pea Puffers. And I know I've said it a few times before, and I'll say it again. If you're new to puffer keeping, then look no further than the Pea Puffer. This is a fantastic, beginner for freshwater puffer keeping, or really puffer keeping in general, if you ask me. And for a few different reasons. One, these guys only grow up to be about an inch, inch and a half, and yeah, that's about it. So you could easily fit like 3 of them in a 10-gallon tank, or say you have like a vertical tank or like a column tank of some sort. Depending on how big it is, this could be a nice little fish for that as well. Another thing that makes pea puffers a little easier to keep than a lot of other puffers is you don't have to worry about keeping their teeth trimmed. However, they'll still appreciate some young, small, juvenile snails and such. If you're new to puffer keeping, I would highly recommend this be the puffer you start with before you get any of these others on the list. That, and while they might be a little fish, they pack a big personality and they will not disappoint you. Next up on the list is the Arrowhead Puffer. So the Arrowhead Puffer, which are also known as the Pignose Puffer occasionally, is another ambush predator puffer that kind of likes to chill out towards the bottom of the tank or by the substrate. And speaking of substrates, this is definitely one where you want a sandy substrate, and honestly the finer grain of the sand, the better, because not only do they like to chill by the substrate, they sometimes even like to dig themselves into or burrow themselves into the sand. It's part of how they do about their ambush hunting in the wild too. And while we've named some puffers on this list that can do well with its own species, or with caution maybe in a community tank, this is definitely not one of those puffers. This is a puffer that is very territorial and more so very predatorial. So the only thing you should be ever putting in its water are feeder shrimp, feeder crays, feeder crabs, basically sources of food. Arrowhead puffers usually max out around the 6-inch range, so a 40-gallon breeder would be awesome for these guys. Although I suppose if you can't house something that big, you could probably do okay with a 29-gallon tank. Wouldn't want to go any smaller than that though. A plus side is because these guys don't move very fast, they tend to have a little bit of a slower metabolism than some other puffers do. However, while I speak of their metabolism, thus a little bit of their eating habits, this is a puffer that sometimes can be very strict on live feeding. So if you're not into live feedings, then you may not really care for this option. But if you're all about the live feedings and seeing it do like what it would do in the wild, then this could be a pretty good match. Overall, I would definitely say this would definitely not be a beginner puffer, but to maybe some of you that have had maybe another puffer species or two and are ready to maybe move up in the puffer keeping world, consider an Arrowhead Puffer, because while they do present their challenges, when they're kept correctly, this is a very rewarding puffer and just a real cool one to observe. Number 7, the Congo Puffer. As the name would suggest, these little ambush predator puffers are native to parts of the Congo River and the Democratic Republic of Congo, not to be confused with the spotted Congo puffer we saw earlier. It's also commonly known as a potato puffer because sometimes they kind of resemble the color of a potato. Now, as I said earlier, these are not to be confused with the spotted Congo puffers, as one, as we saw earlier, spotted Congo puffers prefer more to swim around in their tank, whereas these Congo puffers are another ambush predator puffer. It's another puffer that, like the Arrowhead puffer we just saw, likes to hang out towards the substrate and even bury itself in the sandy substrate once in a while. Congo puffers usually max out somewhere between the range of 4 to 6 inches before their growth spurt is all said and done. So something like a 29-gallon tank where I house mine in would be fine, although if you want to go ahead and give it a bigger tank like a 40 or even just a 38, 36 bow front, all sorts of options, 29 gallons and above would be alright. Although some people have kept them in a 20-gallon long, which is okay. I wouldn't go any shorter than that though. One of the keys about an ambush puffer with the Congo puffer and the Arrowhead puffer, or really even the dragon puffer we mentioned earlier, is it's all about giving your puffer a wide footprint. While they don't like to move around as much as like some of the Amazons or the spotted Congos that we met earlier, these guys still like to move around every once in a while and try to bury themselves in another spot. seeing if they can try to catch prey somewhere else if one spot's not working so hot for them. Much like the Arrowhead though, Congo Puffers sometimes can be a little picky with their diet, and while there are exceptions across the board here, some of them out there really stay picky and just won't take anything else but live foods. With that in mind, this is definitely another puffer that should be kept in a tank all by itself. It will not do very well with tank mates, unfortunately. This is a very predatory puffer, and anything that's unfortunate enough to crawl or swim in front of its path, it has a high probability of becoming dinner. Well, some people, I guess, may kind of look at it as more of a pain. Something I kind of like about the Congo Puffer is I kind of like going up to the tank and trying to see where he's hiding each single day because, well, his color sometimes helps him blend in with the sand, so it's like a little hide-and-seek game. And, you know, you look around for a bit, and then it's like, aha, I found you. If you sit back and relax, you might get lucky and watch him catch a fish or something, which, especially if you're into the live feeding stuff, can be a lot of fun and very rewarding to watch. So if you don't mind a puffer that sometimes likes its privacy and don't mind the idea of some live feedings, then again, this could be a puffer that you could get along with very well. Finally, at number 8, we have figure 8 puffers. I feel like it's only fitting that we put figure 8s number 8 on this list. Not because they're the 8th best puffer, far from it. While they do have their challenges, this is a beautiful puffer and they don't get very big. These guys usually max out around the 3 to 4 inches mark before their growth spurt is completed. So I could say you'd probably be able to get away with a trio and a 29 perhaps, or if you want to go up to a 40-gallon tank, you could probably do up to 5 perhaps, if you got enough decor and such to break up line of sight and create multiple pieces of territory. So the figure 8 puffers, which are also somewhat known as eye spot puffers, get their name from, well, if you look on their back, it looks like they got a little figure 8 on them, hence the name. Yes, it is true, they will eventually need to be brought over into brackish water conditions, which I notice some fish keepers can sound rather intimidating, having to start a puffer in some freshwaters, although I guess you really don't have to. You could just try to acclimate them over to a brackish condition right away. However, usually in a juvenile stage, supposedly they do better in freshwater, but regardless whether that's true or not, you will need to put them in some saltier conditions. With a specific gravity, I keep mine at 1.008, although they can go up to 1.012. So if you're like me, and for 15 years, guys, I kept nothing but freshwater fish, so I can totally get it. I can get the idea of transferring a puffer from freshwater to brackish water does sound intimidating. I'm right there with you. I was intimidated by it at first, but perhaps I'll even make a video on it later, as I have some green spotted puffers that I'll be transferring over into brackish water here in the near future. It's really not as hard as I'm sure you're thinking it is. My main advice there is just before you get these guys, look up some examples online of what people have done and like how they set up brackish water and such, how they do the acclimation process and all that. And once you actually carry it out in motion, guys, it's actually a lot simpler. But if you're up for something a little different, and perhaps up for a little bit of a challenge here with brackish water conditions, then a figure 8 puffer can be very rewarding, as you can see with this little guy right here. Their markings are beautiful, and it's another puffer that loves to swim all around the tank, and they have that little puppy dog personality that they're so notorious for and so loved for. And that, fish fam, are my top 8 suggestions for puffers that can fit in a 40-gallon tank or smaller. But of course, let me know what you think about this video. Do you like my suggestions? Do you think I'm maybe off on a couple of these? Or maybe is there a suggestion out there that you would recommend that maybe I didn't talk about? Let me all know in the comments below. And of course, if you're new to the channel, have not done so already, and like what you see, hopefully you do. If you do like what you see, consider clicking the subscribe button to stay in the loop with everything I do here. Little list videos such as this, fish revealings, got some fish swaps coming up here soon. Gonna see if maybe I can make an aquashella in 2022. We might try to go to Chicago. and or Dallas, maybe. I mean, obviously both are a long ways away, but we'll see about that. But got some fish swaps that are coming up here in the neighborhood here in the next few months that we might try to attend here, and definitely got to take you guys along for the trip there, as it seems like you like those, and all sorts of other stuff are coming along the way here on the channel as well. But of course, folks, as always, thank you so much for all the support. Each and one of y'all are so awesome. Getting closer and closer to 1K here, guys, and getting some new merch and stuff here along the way. I'll have some more news on that later as it develops. Right now, it's very much in the early stages, so I guess I better not say a whole lot. But as always, thanks for the support and watching this video. I will see you all in the next one. Stay fantastic.